Hi, welcome to another training episode with Lattice. In today's video, we're going to look at what's better, two-arm fingerboarding or one-arm fingerboarding. So a lot of people ask us, what's a better method to train? Hanging on a fingerboard with one hand or with two hands? We're going to look at the positives and negatives of both, and also who should be doing what. So first of all, we need to say that depending on the protocol that you're using, so the training protocol and the edge size will dictate whether you can do it on one arm or two arm. So for me, if you're doing repeaters workouts, you'll usually be doing it on two arms because the intensity on one arm will add up to quite a lot. So unless you're very elite, you shouldn't be doing repeater workouts hanging from one arm. If you're using a really small edge, the same applies. So if we're looking at sort of 10 mil and less, or even 13 mil and less, depending on what fingerboard you have, you should be using a two-arm hang protocol. Once again, if you're really elite and you're starting to push your finger strength to the top level, that means that you should be able to do this on one arm, but it's still going to be really, really intense. So what do I mean by elite? Well, generally, I'd say that's probably looking at around V11 or Font 8A and above, or around 8B plus Sport, 514A and above. That will usually mean that you're going into that bracket of having high enough finger strength for doing those two protocols, repeaters and small edges, on one hand. However, once again, you'll have some really strong people out there with really good finger strength that can do this. But if you're already reaching that and you haven't reached those grades yet, then you need to be looking at probably other areas of your training or try and maintain this level. So the benefits of two-arm fingerboarding is you can change the type of grip position in use a lot easier, and you can build up the load much more slowly. So even if it's body weight all the way up to hanging with a lot of weight, you can use that for loads and loads of different protocols, and it's generally what I recommend for most people. If you're starting to use an edge size, which means that you're hanging with more than 150% body weight, that'll mean that you've got quite a lot of weight hanging from your waist. And that tends to be when people become really uncomfortable with the amount of weight that they're hanging on two arms. So above that is when I'd start to look to one arm if you wanted to improve that area. However, once again, this is dependent on whether you feel comfortable, because you can really push the two-arm finger strength training to a high extent. So if you feel uncomfortable with the weight around your waist, you can get a dipping belt, which will make it feel much more comfortable. Another reason why you might struggle a little bit more with two-arm fingerboarding is if you're starting to feel any issues with your shoulders, and that particularly sort of the impingement feeling at the front of your shoulder. So if you're getting any pain here, it's always worth talking to a professional about this. But particularly if you're a tall climber and you've got a narrow fingerboard, hanging in that two-arm position can aggravate the shoulders slightly. So you can move on to one-arm fingerboarding if you can cope with the intensity on your fingers, because it allows your shoulders to open up slightly so they're in a less acute position. So if you're having any shoulder issues, you can always move to one-arm fingerboarding as well, but just make sure you can cope with the intensity. One reason for staying with two-arm fingerboarding is if there's a disparity between the two hands. So loads of people have asked, what happens if my right hand's really strong and my left hand's weaker, or vice versa? If that's the case, you can reduce the weight on one arm hangs and change the load as you go. But a lot of evidence in sport suggests that if you do bilateral training, so both sides together, that's going to improve the difference between your hands, so it'll get it a lot closer. Yes, you might not be pushing the right hand if it's stronger as much, but it means that it's going to bring up your left to the same extent and try and balance them out a lot easier. You might find that progressing a disparity between strengths in different hands by doing one-arm hangs actually makes the difference worse. So by doing two-arm hangs, it'll bring it closer together. One-arm hangs, you've got to be really strict and not let the strongest arm get even further away from the weaker side. So one-arm hanging, why is it good? It's really useful for one, if you've not got as much weight. Two, if you're starting to progress your fingerboard into a level where you've got a lot of weight around your waist and it's starting to feel uncomfortable. And three, it builds a load of really good stability around the shoulders. This is really useful for real climbing scenarios when you do big moves to small holds and you really need to pull through from that movement and you're on your one arm for quite a long period of time. It's something we use for our testing as well because it's a gold standard of testing. But once again, if you're not being able to cope with the intensity and your shoulders aren't up to the challenge, you really need to build up slowly. So make sure that you have a good pulley setup and you're building up the shoulder strength around that joint to make sure that you're able to actually cope with hanging on one arm, even just from a bar to begin with. So that's a quick summary on whether it's a fingerboard on 2 arms or 1 arm. If you're a beginner, intermediate, or building your finger strength on 2 arms, then you can stick with that protocol and there's no need to go to 1 arm. If you're progressing your fingerboarding beyond 150% body weight on 2 arms, it might be a good time to move to 1 arm and try it out, but only stick with edges that you can manage the size on and grip positions that you're used to, and don't try repeaters on that level. If you're an elite level climber or someone who's really pushing the grade, you can do a lot of your training on 1 arm. You can still progress that 2 arm if you wanted to, but 1 arm training is where you really need to move to get the intensity right and make sure that you're pushing that level to the highest extent.